So a couple of key things. What are we really talking about when we talk about ESG? So it's environmental, social, and governance. So to be really clear, we're not focusing on the safety elements or occupational health and safety or HSE, whichever terminology you want to use to explain that element. This is very much focused on the impact of environment, social, and governance and how that structures the way that we piece our strategies together. First one being environmental is not so much about switching across to electric vehicles and, putting solar panels on the roof. That's a component of it, but it's understanding the unique impact that our organizations have on climate change, that we have on the environment around us. Obviously dumping your waste in rivers isn't really something that's done anymore, thank goodness, because we've had some support from great government organizations to get that to work out. But more and more organizations are taking that internally and working through how they can provide a better benefit to the environment around them. Social is taking that same system or that same element that we use in environments and making it more about the community and people environment around us. And this is the part that I think is really interesting, because we've seen over time there's been this amazing evolution and push, particularly for the streams of getting more women involved in logistics. That's been a big push in the last few years, and it was really pleasing to see that that's really started to pick up. But now it's about how do we actually start to get the leadership right and that mix right across the logistics as well, because that's always a challenge. But the other big one here is how do we actually adapt into the broader community and make work life more accessible for those who may have a physical or mental disability that's either visible or not visible, and integrate them into the workforce so that they become I guess the right word is a prouder member of the community, and they feel like they're offering more and they can live a life that the rest of us would probably consider more generally to be what we'd expect. And the last piece is governance, which we're in a supply chain field. If everything that we do is around controls, processes, the right leadership practices, but this is also about showing accountability. And I think this is a core part of a theme that comes through with sustainability and environment, is that there's one thing to say you're going to do something, but how do you actually demonstrate that? Who's going to hold you accountable for it? And how do you prove out how that fits into your strategy going forward for both your board from a profitability perspective, but also to your customers to demonstrate that you're leaning into it and you're spending your time ensuring that everything's stacking up the right way. So there's a couple of key parts here I really want to look at. So it's starting to become more and more of an essential part of our strategy, and I think it's really here to stay. And there's a few key things that I'd call out. So in terms of value, McKinsey research has shown that ESG can drive a reduction of costs by 60%. Now, this is really interesting because we're still on this, I think particularly in Australia, we're on this path of discovering how to be economical and environmentally focused. And the two don't necessarily marry up very well. But we're starting to get to a critical mass now, and where we can start to see that is providing value back into our business. If I can give an example of that in third-party logistics, if we have a client come to us who says, we'd really like to have sustainable packaging, we'd like the practices to be able to, provide compostable mailing satchels, and we'd like you to use water-based tape instead of plastic-based tape, all these different changes. The reality is that if we do that just for that client, it becomes a cost impost for our client because it's different to what we do for everyone else. So our role is to take those changes and implement that across our business and take that out to all of our customers. And that's where we'll actually unlock some of the value and the cost saving. So the cost of saving for us is not doing it for one, but doing it for many. In terms of investment, investors now are looking for different non-financial factors to be considered in their investment decision. So 85% of investors from this Gartner report have also flagged that they consider ESG factors in their investments. So this is also a big change. It's not just about how the performance of the business tracks along. It's not just about the size of the prize. It's now about ensuring that when they're investing their money, they're going to be seen to be making the right decision from a social and community aspect. And the last piece is for customer affinity. So, you talk through the story of what you do from a practice perspective, and I gave the example of where a customer would come to us and ask for a particular change, we actually need to find a way to adopt that across our business. And then that way we become a stronger choice and a stronger position for them. Much like investors looking for the right story to go out and tell their shareholders, the same thing happens for our customers. And it certainly puts us in a better position to be able to win RFPs if we can demonstrate that we have these things covered off in our strategy. The top three drivers of ESG have been, we've really touched on in the last slide, but there was some research done by Deloitte around their CFO sentiment report, and it showed the top three drivers of ESG action were investor or shareholder demands, so really large chunk, 67%. Competitive and reputational advantage, so about 50% see that as core to them being able to differentiate from their market, but also ensuring they're doing the things they're expected to do from a reputational perspective. And then the last one is, it is the right thing to do. And that's a core driver behind these decision points as well. So there's a shift that's happening where it's being understood that from an investor perspective, it's being required, and it's something that really needs to start to happen. From a competitive and reputational perspective, you need to be able to stand up against your competitors and show that you've got a point of differentiation. There's not a lot of time left for this to continue to be a point of differentiation. It's now going to be table stakes. And that's starting to happen with a lot of suppliers now into larger retail environments. And we're starting to see the impacts of it across smaller retailers as well. And obviously the right thing to do is, as a core driver, is ensuring that you're not doing anything to make things worse, is realistically what that talks to. And from a board and C-suite executive position, it really is making sure that we don't expose ourselves to any risk, and we don't expose ourselves to any, I guess, any risk of adverse press. The other paper that came out of the Gartner 2020 report has demonstrated that ESG has become critical to 89% of business leaders. So companies incorporating ESG believe it's going to have this effect on their organization. So 40% talking about it strengthening the brand. So that's really just, how do I actually bring this to life and make it a part of what the market sees of me, and how do we actually then turn that into increasing productivity after we strengthen the brand, because we get larger clients, we get better clients who understand what we're trying to do or aligned to the brand, which means increasing productivity. Then the flow-on effect is attracting new customers by doing something different that you haven't done before. Again, that differentiation piece starting to go away, and it's really starting to become more of table stakes. The other parts in here, which I really like, is about improving supply chain management, because you have a core focus around making the right decisions with ESG in the back of your mind. It does change your way of thinking, and it does change the criteria that you would go through from a procurement process as well. The last one here is a big one, is recruiting talent. In all of the interviews that I've done with anyone in the last, probably the last 2 years, one of the key considerations for them is about what impact the organization I'm working for has on the environment, and what they're doing to help negate that or improve that position, so that they can align their values with the organization. So I think that's a big part, particularly when we've got a talent crunch that's happening across most markets. Now, in saying that, it's not simple. There are a lot of things to consider as we go through this, and we'll talk through some of the complexities that are facing us at the moment. One of those great demonstrations of this is the City of Melbourne publishes an A to Z guide for waste disposal and recycling. And this is a really great demonstration of how complex this can be. So we have the bins and collection days. Now we have that in every council. I can't tell you how many times I've put the red bin out instead of the yellow bin, or the blue bin, and that hasn't gone out on the right day. And then you're trying to find ways to get everything out, and you're putting things in other people's bins because you've stuffed up the weeks. Like, it's something that really happens, right? So it's a fairly straightforward thing, but then you've got to add on the other things, like how do we do recycling in apartments? So apartment living is very different, and it's getting, there are now, in many of the larger apartment buildings that are popping up, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, there are trash concierges who will come around door to door with their big trolleys of multiple bins on there, which will be, aluminium, plastic bottles, paper, any green waste, any food waste. It's really starting to become prominent in those environments. My brother-in-law is a strata manager or a director at a strata business. And he's finding that this is being a request now of smaller apartment blocks because they've seen it happen in larger apartment buildings as well. Then you have the A to Z guide to recycling, which talks about how you can recycle everything from paper up to a television. You then have the food and garden organic service, which again is slightly different to the bins and collection days, and that's starting to roll out across multiple councils. Then you've got what we do with hard waste. So that's a different piece altogether. So it's curbside collection. It's either booked or scheduled or certain times during the year. And what do we do with waste recycling stations? And are they local enough? And in Sydney in particular, we're seeing many more of these recycling environments pop up in suburban areas. And understanding the impact that has on the environment around it as well is quite interesting. Then you have garden waste, so treating that differently to food and garden organics. So not fruit and veg, this is your sticks and leaves as you're trimming back all of the trees. E-waste and chemical, as we start to adopt and use more and more electronic devices, we're now at a point where we're seeing more electronic devices per capita than humans we have in the country. It's really it's starting to become a challenge about how we get through that e-waste and deal with those complexities as well. And then there's those pop-up centres that I was talking about before. So even from a consumer perspective, you have a look at these 8 different pieces of information that, let's be honest, 20 years ago was put something in a recycling bin, put something in the rubbish bin. Like, things have moved so far in such a short amount of time, and this complexity really is challenging. When you actually take that and you start to have a look at what's in a corporate environment, it's no less complex. The key to being able to deploy anything here is understanding the data and metrics that you want to drive to demonstrate your involvement, your improvement, and your attachment to anything around an ESG component. I'll talk about some of that a little bit later. Then there's driving company culture. If you don't set it from the top, it's not something that's going to happen. You want it to be in every conversation, and you want it to be in every consideration before you make any decisions. So it has to be led by executives. There's no two ways about it. And if it doesn't fit into that company culture from the top, it's very hard to drive from the bottom. There are many examples you will see where you have, use the classic office manager who has implemented a recycling regime. And I think we've probably all worked in offices where we've seen that. And there's one person who's really trying to drive the recycling push through the business, but it just doesn't resonate because it's not part of the culture. The next one is meeting investor expectations. So if they have taken a stake in your business and you're starting to report on everything for them, they're going to have expectations on that, just like they do financially and productivity-wise. So how do you actually meet those and bring them into what you're doing on a day-to-day basis? Then you have supply chain optimization. This is one that we all love. And once you start to change things and you look at waste reduction, you look at how you can actually change your waste profile. You look at using different alternative fuel sources. You look at using alternative packaging sources. You introduce automation. Like, it becomes a real challenge to get all of that to piece together. So you have to have that in consideration as well. Having KPIs in place really ties into the company culture. Are people being measured? Do you have SMART goals in there that are specific and measurable? That's a key to actually driving this forward as well. How do we minimize waste, which is not just talking about diverting landfill to recycling, it's also reducing the overall waste of the operation. In a third-party logistics environment, it's a little bit harder to control the waste aspect of it because we are a downstream receiver of what our supplier or what our customer sends to us. But one of the things that we're looking to do is, can I help them from a demand planning perspective and give them better capability in their organisation to help reduce waste and also reduce their costs? We then have managing the social impact. So as we implement any changes socially here or from the aspect of community impact, what does that look like as it comes back into our business, and how does that impact not only the people that we might be making changes or concessions for, but how does that impact them and everyone around them? And then the last one is, how do we track and report outcomes, and how do we bring all of it to life so it becomes real? So the result is there's a lot to consider, but hopefully I can talk through a couple of things which will help to define your path and help find different ways to structure an approach to dealing with ESG. So I think that the real clear thing here is to establish change, you have to understand your priorities, your capabilities, and your roadmap. Now, the road to ESG looks different for absolutely everyone. There's no two businesses that will be exactly the same. And I think that the key part here in terms of establishing your priorities is identifying where you are on your particular path. And then you have to cross-reference that with what you're actually capable of doing. There's no point in me as a third-party logistics provider in putting in a priority around reducing the carbon footprint of an Australia Post delivery van for my clients' parcels that are in the back of that van. I have no control over it. I don't have the capability to reach that far. But what can I do downstream, upstream of that, that will impact downstream, which might be order route consolidation. So consolidating all of a particular postcode and sending that on a particular day. And they're the kind of pieces that we can do to impact that. And then really setting out the roadmap. Where do you want to get to? What's the North Star ambition? And then, breaking that down like you would in a traditional strategy of the bite-sized chunks, the low-hanging fruit, and how you can take steps forward is a big key. One of the things that I've noticed in ESG is a call to making things work is really adapting it into your strategy and recognizing that it will require change, and just starting with small incremental low-hanging pieces so that your team gets a feel for, hey, this is actually something we can do, and starting to engage in real small processes. It's like, my son's job every week he's 10, his job every week is to take the bins out. It's not only because I forget which bin goes out on which day or which week. He's much better at remembering that than I am. But it's also so he sees what actually happens with all of that waste and understands it as well. And it's just those tiny little pieces that have now got him thinking when he's in the school playground. I don't have a recycling bin for that product. I'm going to keep it in my bag and take it home and recycle it there where it can get sorted. So it's little small incremental changes that will help to drive that. And then we really need to talk about the metrics that matter. So sustainable change is a big deal, and it's something that we've been talking about for a very long time. What we really want to see is it's a very much about just starting to establish that change. The key things here that I really want to touch on is kind of clarifying in between carbon neutral and net zero. So we hear a lot of talk about net zero and how people are trying to approach that. But the reality is that we've got to have a look at a staged approach to getting there. Net zero is where we do want to go. The reality around carbon neutral is it's effectively offsetting the total amount of carbon emissions. And that can be treated as a financial piece. So I'm offsetting what I'm about to do to destroy the environment by putting aside funding, which is going to help me to go and plant trees, is one way to do it, but it doesn't actually remove the production of CO2, which is part of the reason why net zero becomes a big challenge for us. We don't necessarily want to offset. What we actually want to do is start to develop operations and processes that result in generating no carbon and don't require an offset. So there's a long way to go before we can reach net zero. Like, technology is still being brought to the market to enable it. But this is really what our North Star needs to be in terms of an environmental impact. And when we start to look at critical carbon neutral metrics, and these will change by each organization, but typically they fall into a couple of different buckets. The first being carbon emissions produced that accelerate global warming. There's energy consumption, which causes greenhouse gas emissions and other compounds that are detrimental to the environment. You then have water usage, which it might seem strange for us to say that wasn't that long ago in Australia. That we had a lot of drought going on, when all we see is just piles of water everywhere at the moment. But the reality is that water usage in a continent like ours is very critical, and clean water usage is the other key one. And then waste and pollution, including industrial, hazardous food, construction waste, fuel combustion waste, brake dust, all of these different impacts as well that we need to start to find a way to reduce and measure the reductions on these particular metrics to remove carbon, or the impact of carbon, from our processes. But in terms of culture and company metrics, really comes down to employee health and safety. So that's a key one I think we've gotten very good at in the last 20 to 25 years. There's still a fair way to go. But the understanding of being able to maintain a good healthy and safe work environment actually also includes removing those hazardous compounds from the air we breathe. And it changes the way that we operate. So, we also get something that happens as a call from that. With a better health and safety record and you're injuring less people, you end up with less turnover. Lower turnover means you're keeping people from the community engaged for longer, and that has a net positive impact for the community. Diversity and inclusion is a big one at the moment. So, I talked about previously about women logistics being a real strong movement that's happening at the moment. But gender is no longer just about a binary decision. We need to accommodate for people who identify as a different gender type. Now, we're not going to accommodate for all, but what we want to do is make sure that we're in a position where inclusivity becomes a core part of it, because introducing diversity into the workforce is better for us as operators, but also for the community, and brings across learnings into the business that you might not normally have. And the other component around inclusion is having a work environment which is able to sustain diverse workforce. I think that's a really core one there. And the last one is compliance and ethical operations. Compliance is, we have a lot of it thrust upon us within supply chain, from chain of responsibility through to, guidelines around how we can move particular items. We have placarding, we have different requirements to move through from the EPA, from different industrial bodies that will govern what we do. So I think, we're typically conditioned to how that would work. But there is still more of that company broader compliance that we need to put into place. And the ethical operations piece is really where the environment comes into that decision-making process as well. The core part of why metrics matter. When I saw this, I nearly fell off my chair. So your story and public perception should benefit from the ESG efforts. So that's a big one. And you've got to ensure that the effort you're putting in can be accurately reported and supported with fact. So it's got to support your brand story and public perception. And if you do have those efforts accurately measured, they need to be accurately measured and reported. The ACCC recently launched 2 internet sweeps, and it identified 200 plus companies where they are reviewing their sustainability claims because there are question marks around whether those sustainability claims will stand up to scrutinisation. So they're the things that are really going to jump out for shareholders, and something to consider from a executive level as well. Once you start to put this stuff in place and you make the claims public, you have to be able to back it up. So a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. So there are a few different things. I'll talk about a particular case study with what Woolworths is doing at the moment. And then I just wanted to talk through something else as well to give you an idea of some examples where making small changes can really have a large impact. Now, what Woolworths is aiming to do is to drive change across their entire network by introducing e-axle trailers. So these are refrigerated trailers that run off electricity rather than the power from the vehicle. And the tractor, they're starting to migrate towards them being electric vehicles as well. So these e-axle trailers are saving over 50,000 litres of fuel, or 132 tonnes of CO2 produced over a 10-year period. And it's a big piece that they're doing at the moment to drive that change and put less strain on that diesel environment. As we know, it's becoming a real challenge from a cost perspective as well. So there are multiple benefits to this happening, but the fact that they're driving down this path is really important. And one of the next steps that they're looking at is things like introducing they're trying to develop a lightweight axle and subframe for the trailers that can actually, again, reduce the load from the vehicles and extend the range from the batteries, so that when they go through a charging process, they're extending the range as well as and providing an even bigger reduction on the amount of fuel that they would traditionally use. They're also campaigning in government, so they're quite vocal in government about increasing the charging infrastructure so that can enable greater electric vehicle use. And they're also deploying last mile electric vehicles at the moment. So this is really interesting because the process has already saved nearly 5,000 litres of fuel. But by utilising electric vehicles to do their store deliveries, they're actually navigating a few other social aspects as well, which is curfews of delivering into DCs. They can't obviously, they can't back a 40-ton truck up into a suburban dock at the moment after 10 p.m. By having electric vehicles, the noise pollution has completely reduced and is almost negligible to the point where it can't be heard by the closest neighbours. And that then allows us to unlock one of the challenges we've had in Australia, which is nighttime logistics. So we can manage it from a courier point delivery, but from larger delivery vehicles, you don't find them anywhere after 10 p.m. simply because of all those curfew restrictions. So there's other benefits that will come from that as well. And the other part that they're working on is inclusion for sustainable efficiency. So this is something that Woolworths is really focused on at the moment. So accessibility for people who are physically disabled or have any kind of physical challenges in being able to operate in a typical environment. So that they're doing that quite well by redesigning some of their DCs to the point where now they have some pick packers who have accessibility challenges and can now operate freely within their DCs. Gender equity is a big one, and this is what I really love is they call it out as gender equity. They don't look at it as binary. It is very much about non-binary. So it's a big call out for them to be able to bring that into place. Cultural diversity is huge for them at the moment. So First Nations people has been a big drive for them. You'll see from a lot of their reporting that they are recording the metrics of how they bring those people from the community into the environment, into the workforce, sorry. And it's really interesting because the big shift there is they have a lot of what you would call blue collar workers who are First Nations people, but not as many people who are white collar workers. And so they're actively driving to that change. And then, of course, there's the LGBTQ plus group and making sure that they feel comfortable, can access all the support that they require in that working environment. And the net impact of doing all of this is it doesn't just affect the immediate employees, but the communities and broader society by enabling them to have a more productive part of society, helping communities, so their workforce community, to better understand diversity, and also with these people being in, we have the diversity in stores, it's also in the broader community, and making society at large more inclusive. When you're Australia's largest employer, it's a big deal. Now, briefly, I'll talk through our journey. So we've started to take some steps along the way. So one of the things that we did is we have across all of our facilities, we have about 200 staff that work in blue collar roles. And we combined with one of the local Woolworths DCs, we were using styrofoam cups. Now we had a lot of contingent workforce that were coming through. And so if you think about 1,000 people every day, using on average 3 styrofoam cups a day, it's a lot of waste, it's a lot of landfill, and there's a lot of CO2 in the production of the styrofoam. With our local DC, we switched over to paper cups, which seems like such a small, insignificant change. But the net impact of doing that is when you follow the bouncing ball and you go from 1,000 people using 3 styrofoam cups a day to then migrating to 1,000 people using 3 recyclable paper cups per day. The net impact from that over the course of a month is a reduction of almost 15 tonne of CO2 being produced on a monthly basis. So you're kind of talking about now the use of 60,000 cups over a 20 working day month changes, it impacts into a couple of pallets of cups that you're actually getting through, slight change in cost, but the net impact downstream has been quite large because we're pulling all that CO2 production out of the air, but we're also ensuring that styrofoam is not going back into the environment. And so that's just one small change that we could make that's having a positive impact. And that story gets told a lot around the group as well. People are really excited about those small steps. A couple of things for us is transport optimization. So we optimize we run a multi-carrier environment. So we optimize our routes, based on closest point to the end user and consolidation of driver runs. We also, with multi-site clients, we map their inventory to be in the right location so that their orders are traveling the shortest distance through to the end consumer. That has a cost and obviously an environmental impact. We're reducing complexity by taking effectively what our customers have been trying to do on their own, and we're aggregating all that volume and starting to push that into the different supply chain elements. So our relationships with carriers, with Goodman Fielders as our real estate partner, with our manufacturers of our automation, we can bring all of that in-house and we can aggregate volume across all of the sites and facilities. And the downstream impact for our customers is their complexity from their supply chain starts to diminish, and they're not wasting as much trying to get product into the right place at the right time, because our system will manage that for them. We're reducing wastage and the costs that are associated with that by diverting waste to the right areas. So we've worked out that over the next 12 months on the program that we actually started today, we will remove close to 1.2 tonne of plastic being utilised in our facilities each month. And that doesn't sound like a great deal in the grand scheme of things, but that's not considering the CO2 impact of manufacturing and shipping that to us. More efficient fulfilment. So we are focused heavily in a direct-to-consumer environment on accuracy. That's our core measure, because what we don't want to do is we don't want an order to ever come back, right? Because that creates that return process. So our order fulfillment accuracy at the moment is 99.98%, which is, I'm kind of devastated. I can't say perfect, but nothing ever is in supply chain. Something always has to go wrong. But that accuracy means that we're not getting those returns come back through. And because we continue to focus on that accuracy, our customers seen a huge drop in their returns volume. One customer has seen their returns volume drop from when their previous 3PL to coming to us. They've seen it drop from almost 22% of their volume to less than 5%. Packaging optimization, where we've introduced standardized packaging and packaging robots, along with a cartonization algorithm that allows us to choose the right package and the right packaging for each customer. Because we have 40 clients on a site, we also, as an order comes through that gets packed, it presents the right way to pack it to the user. So it's not left up to the user. We actually control that on the way through. And then our strategic 3PL locations are very close to our main arterials. And one of the core examples of this is we're currently moving from Wetherill Park to a second Eastern Creek facility at the moment, for those of you who are in Sydney. Now, Wetherill Park is actually geographically closer to Chullora, which is the Australia Post main sortation facility, than Eastern Creek is. But where we are in Eastern Creek is we're right on the side of the M7. So we're right on the main arterial roads. The difference is that the trucks that pick up from us and go to Chullora, they're traveling about, I think it's about 4 kilometres further in distance, but they're spending, so they're going from 21 to 25 kilometres, but from Wetherill Park to Chullora, it was 19 kilometres in congestion and 2 kilometres in highway traffic. From here in Eastern Creek, that 19 kilometres in congestion has gone all the way down to 2, and the highway miles is gone up to 23. Now, the highway miles can be anywhere up to 8 times more efficient on fuel than what they can be in congestion. So when you think about that from the amount of trucks that we're sending out every day, it compounds into quite a large number. And that's just one of those small steps that you can take. And this is it's a really good example of how you can take some really small steps and have a large impact on the environment. Really quickly, I realise I'm getting close to time. You're not going it alone. There are specialists out there. So talk to your peers, talk to people in different environments. So I speak a lot with first-party suppliers as well as my customers about what their journeys are, and listen to what they're doing, because you just need to adopt and pinch their ideas where they make sense. The other thing is there's plenty of experts that are around at the moment, so let them extend your capability. Like you use a consultant or a solutions designer to refine and optimize, you should do the same for your ESG as well. There's a lot of road to cover. There's a lot of new, so use the people who have already been there. And then the last one is you leverage existing technologies and best practices to reduce wastage in your supply chain, and look at how you can extend them and customize them to provide a much better experience for your customers, and introduce some really strong environmental impacting changes, such as the right tape or the right packaging that could really have a material impact down the chain.